Hello and welcome back to Fuller's College Pre-Press class. This is Professor Ben Hewitt, and we're still talking about GCR. This is video 4 now of the PIA Pre-Press Training Handbook, section 4.2, Color Reproduction. So I want to show you a demonstration of GCR. The book talks about it and it shows it in those charts. So let's show you in practically using the same values. I want you to see this to understand what's going on. So we're using Illustrator for this because Illustrator is where I like to play with my CMYK colors. It's personal preference on that one. So I'm going to take the middle of these. I made 3 boxes just to show. So here's going to take the first one, and we're going to use the color here to set up the color that the book showed us. 20% cyan, 75% magenta, 75% yellow. There is our kind of reddish color, a trichromatic red that's not all the way red, not all the way 100% magenta yellow, with a little bit of cyan to it that dulls it out so it's less intense. That makes it a slightly more gray color than if it was just purely the other two. So now let's go ahead and try this out. We're going to take all 3 of these and make them the same color. On the left, we have, well, I'll move this over a little. Whoop. We have our full GCR. So if you apply GCR all the way, here's what you get to this. Remember, if we're looking at it, we see that there's 20%, 75, and 75. That means that the gray component of this is 25%. So you want to do minus 20. I could do this here, minus 20, just to show you how that works. Minus 20, minus 20. Don't you like how it does the math for you? And 20, the black takes over for it. So there you have it. The GCR version, if you go complete GCR from the original to that one, this trichromatic red is now made out of only 55% magenta and yellow and 20% black. Mathematically, theoretically, it adds up to being the same thing, but you can see a difference. I sincerely hope you can see a difference. I'll have to double check my recording to make sure that the video recording I'm using is sensitive enough to the color differences. Otherwise, I'm talking about stuff that you're not seeing, and that would make me really sad. Anyways, so there's the full GCR. Now, you can do a less aggressive GCR. Let's say we only take out half of it. So if we take out half of this, that's 10 is half of 20. So let's do minus 10, minus 10, minus 10, and then replacing that with 10% black. You can see that it's still not the same, but it's a little bit closer to the original. You're not going to get the exact same thing if you're using GCR as if you're using the original color. You can't. The original color is the original color. And in this case, original is still a reproduction of something that's probably outside the gamut of CMYK. But here we are. So that's my demonstration for you. You can see the differences when you remove some of the cyan or all of the cyan. And also with GCR, you're not just removing cyan. You are removing all 3 colors to make it less saturated. And I literally mean not in the color sense, but in the less saturated, the paper is less saturated with ink. Let me switch back to our charts here again. And that's what this chart is showing. The 3 color red on the left is what we started out with. And the 50% GCR was the 50% one on our Illustrator slide I just showed you. That's the effect of reducing it just a little bit. So GCR can be done more tactfully rather than removing all the color. Because if you strip all the color out of an image, it's going to look like you stripped all the color out of the image. You can't do it without it showing up. There's also something called Undercolor Addition, UCA, that happens sometimes where people will go back and, or not people, you'll have an algorithm do it for you normally, but the computer will add some color back into areas that were too aggressively GCR'd. Because in some cases, that tertiary color really defines what the color looks like. That red wasn't the best example, but it's a pretty decent one. If you start using colors that are kind of a complex in the kind of maroon burgundy side of colors, and you start replacing it with black and removing the cyan, magenta, and yellow out of it a little bit, you're not going to get burgundy anymore. You're going to get a dark red. You'll have cyan, sorry, not cyan. You'll probably lose all the cyan. You'll end up with magenta, yellow, and black, kind of like we did, but darker. And you're not going to get the same color. It will significantly alter the appearance. And that's just one example. Other problems are with browns. GCR is particularly harsh to brown. And I'll tell you a story from my last job before I started teaching. And it's a somewhat sad story because I didn't understand this yet. I had not fully understood what GCR was doing, or that the place that was doing my printing for me was doing GCR. Side note on that, sometimes print shops don't do everything themselves, especially small shops like the ones I used to work for. Oftentimes you'll have some presses in your shop, but if you needed to do a longer production run, you would farm it out to a partner somewhere else who had more presses or bigger presses. This was the case with this job. There was a leather sofa company. Anyone who's opposed to leather, forgive me, I didn't choose my clients. I was only the pre-press operator. But anyways, they had a catalog of their new range of sofas they were selling. And these new sofas were in dark, deep, like espresso coffee colored chocolate, not chocolate, chocolate's too rich and light. There's a piece of chocolate on my desk in front of me. Lucky me. But if you think about like dark chocolate and stuff, it's like 80% cacao. Is it cacao? Am I saying the right thing or is that the wrong one? 80% bean, those ones. That kind of really, really dark, almost black, but it's still brown. Yeah, that was not printing correctly. Our client gave us the file. They photographed as well as they could, and they had professional photographers doing it. We printed out their proofs and got stuff going to them. And when we saw the final, those couches that were supposed to be this nice dark espresso brown weren't. They came through as pure black. Like they just looked like black couches. You couldn't see that they were colored at all. They just looked like black couches. And the guy from the leather company is like, what's going on? My couches look black. And I had to explain it to him as best I could. The best I could do was show him in his image that he gave us the original CMY values for that color involved like 80% everything to make a very dark color. And that's how you get a dark brown. You have to do high percentage values of all three of the trichromatics and black to make it darker. And I didn't realize at the time what was going on, but even that was enough to really convince him, look, if the black is this close to 100%, it's just going to show as black, which is true, but I didn't fully understand it yet. I was still new to pre-pressing, at least to color management. I was still new to at that point. I now know that even the most modest GCR on a color that's nearly black is simply going to turn it black. If you have a trichromatic color that's like 80, 80, 80, 80 for CMY and K, you're just going to end up with like, you can't actually go darker. And if you end up with, 50, 50, 50, 100, and it'll be a very dark black. Maybe rich, maybe not. We'll talk about that another time, rich black versus not rich black, because that's an interesting topic as well. But anyways, UCA could have saved that. If we'd added some color back into it to bring it back to having an identity and not just being pure neutral darkness, which is what it turned into, we would have been good. So the advantages and disadvantages of the two systems. Under color removal, UCA does reduce the total ink, which can help you not get blisters, which is when there's so much ink that the paper starts to bubble. Or set off, which is when one sheet sticks to the next one when you stack them after printing. You might have seen this in newspapers and sometimes even in books where it got bound while it was still a little bit wet. That could be an issue. That means that the ink will then transfer to the other side of the book or other papers or the back side of the next copy of the flyer. And that's not a good thing. So using less ink reduces drying time and reduces that chance of happening, or of the paper just going full spit wad, which is never good. And if you're using UCA, because you're still retaining the trichromaticness of your colors, they're still dark, you're just removing enough that you're not going to put too much ink on the paper, then, you can still adjust it because you still have full control of the balance between cyan, magenta, and yellow. That gray balance is still controlled by the press operator in the end. They're able to turn on or off, adjust the levels of ink being used on a press so that you can achieve that balance again. However, that does come at the cost of having to know how to do that because it's harder to control that. And with UCA has happened, that means that as the press continues to run and water is being refilled for the ink water system and ink is being refilled and it runs low and then runs high and you have to readjust that balance for all the different colors. That can be difficult over a long press run because you have to maintain this careful balance of all these colors straight at the same percentage at all times on a press for millions of copies. That's hard to do. So here's what GCR does. GCR gives you a stable gray balance by having less gray to balance. This is one of those Star Wars prophecy bringing balance to the Force by killing off all the Jedi. Yeah, I guess that does balance it. There's only 2 Sith. There's like 100 Jedi. That's not balanced. Who wants a balanced Force? You guys, think about what you're doing here. But anyways, yeah, it's balanced because there's nothing left. This is kind of like your Pax Romanus from the ancient world, where Rome would invade someplace and declare peace after they won. But peace involved burning the whole place to the ground and salting the earth so nothing ever grows there again. I forget who says this. Some ancient historian says Rome makes a desert and calls it peace. So they come through and ruin your crops and kill all your people and level your cities and say, there is peace here now. Nope, there's no people, there's no conflict. Anyways, that's kind of the GCR method. If there's no color, it's always balanced, right? It's hard to not balance your gray when your gray is a single color of ink. You're able to control flesh tones and wood tones, especially dark browns. If you know what you're doing with them and you make sure it's not too aggressive, then yeah, you're able to maintain that and it won't go too wonky. One of the first things people will notice, by the way, is flesh tones. People are very, very good at spotting flesh tones and knowing if they look lifelike or not. It's one of the ways we know if people are sick, and one of the things we notice about dead bodies, and one of the reasons it unsettles us. If people's skin doesn't look alive, it's a little bit unsettling, a little bit creepy. So flesh tones we're very attuned to. Every single human has the ability to determine at a quick glance if flesh is alive or not. So careful on that printing. The flesh doesn't look like you're printing a bunch of zombies instead of people. Anyways, sorry, side note there. And you use less processed color ink. Black ink's cheaper to make. Black is the oldest printing ink, and the easiest one to make is called carbon black. And carbon that we get comes from ash and soot and burned things. Therefore, it's the cheapest and easiest thing to make. You can always make as much black as you want by using charcoal, basically. It's cheaper than refining pigments to get a pure cyan. So by using less colored ink, the cost of operating that press goes down a bit. You reduce drying problems and drying time, but it comes at a cost. Magic has a price, dearie. By doing this, again, by declaring peace when you've destroyed a whole society, what you've done here is make it so it's going to be balanced, but you'll have no adjustments left. If you have taken away the trichromatic grays and the neutral grays built of CMY throughout your whole thing, there's no more gray balance left to be had. It's already been consumed by transferring it into the other ink color. By using black ink instead, you've already declared that's the balance. There's no adjusting that. Also, you can have a problem with balancing dense enough black type with dot gain and shadow areas. So the darker parts of the image start to look very, very dark. And if you're trying to have black type near it and trying to make it look similar enough, make it look dark enough, you're going to have difficulties with that. Also, you're reducing the saturation of the images. As you saw in our Illustrator demo, and if you watch the Photoshop video that I shared with you that someone else put up online, thank you, someone else, you can see that that photo of that plaza does overall lose its color a bit when GCR is applied. It does happen, especially in the darker areas, because in darker areas, honestly, you want to be removing the right amounts of light from that paper so that people see the correct color they would have seen in nature or in real life. And if you're not removing as much because you've decided to use less ink and less colors, you're not showing the same color anymore. You're showing something lighter. You are showing something that's more gray. So GCR has those disadvantages. And again, if I'd understood this better, I could have controlled the process to preserve those dark browns in that leather sofa ad I was working on all those years ago. Sticks with me. I still feel bad about it once I learned about it later. I mean, we were able to come to an agreement at the time and everyone was accepting of the results, but we could have done better. And you should always try to do better. I'm still haunted by that. Anyways, so that's GCR for you. GCR stabilizes your print, simplifies the colors you use at the cost of just not reaching all the colors. All right, thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.